Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Naspers Group, Cristina Berta Jones, and Amadeus Ventures, Suzanna Chiu, in discussion with Skift's Rafa Ali.
All right, so we're in the home stretch now. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The best part of the conference is starting now. So I'll set this up. So we are doing an investment strategies panel with two very smart people in corporate venturing. So we deliberately decided not to put a regular VC on this in this group. We wanted corporate venturing because the VCs will talk the exact same thing, blockchain, this, that, all that. So we decided not to do that. So this is corporate venturing, one from the travel industry, Amadeus. Suzanna heads the Ventures group inside Amadeus. Cristina comes from how many of you know Naspers as a company? I think Europeans are probably smarter than Americans. Come on. So Naspers is a company that I've followed for about 15 years in my life. And it's a South African media company that is one of the world's largest media companies. Probably did the most intelligent, smartest investment ever in history. Tencent, which they own 30%. It's worth hundreds of billions or something like that at this point. So, and Cristina has been investing, and one of the things Naspers did very, very early, 20 years ago, this was before anybody else thought of it, is started investing in emerging markets on the internet side years ago. So a big investment on the travel side they have is Make My Trip in India, for instance, which Ibibo they had that merged with Make My Trip. Right. And obviously all kinds of other e-commerce players. So Cristina heads the B2C e-commerce as the COO, based in Amsterdam now, because I think the headquarters for the company is now in Amsterdam. So she looks not just at travel, but all across e-commerce, obviously, as well. So we wanted two very varied, experienced people on the panel, and so thank you for your time. Corporate venturing, very different than regular venture capital, and you're not just investing, you're buying as well.
We're investing for the long term.
Okay.
So it's actually it's a very specific focus. I guess it's neither purely financial nor strategic, as in the sense of buying a company to incorporate it in one's operations. But it's essentially buying with the intent to hold for the long term and to invest in large, lasting, consumer-focusing platforms that become part of consumers' daily lives, that over time generate cash flows and are sort of holds forever, whatever that means in the internet world these days. Wow. Forever is never forever, but the intent is the long term. Yeah, it's not a quick flip.
So emerging
that's
markets
different than
was
VCs.
Probably why emerging markets?
Well, it was where the space that Naspers knew. So as South Africans, they had the courage to go into China and India and other emerging markets.
Eastern Europe, I know.
Eastern Europe. I'm half Romanian. Some of the first investments, and actually our biggest holdings, are investments we've made in some of these smaller markets in which, frankly, VCs typically don't even look, because typically those are not consumer markets that would generate your moonshot type of investment. So for example, one business that was one of my first investments in Romania, a company called eMag, which is essentially the Amazon of Romania, is now $1.5 billion business in terms of sales. But no VC would have, back in 2011, put money behind that model and that small of a market. So we've taken those punts early. We've held these investments. We continued investing in them, and we certainly have grown some very big and lasting platforms in the markets in which we've invested. We've done so early, which is, I guess, the trick.
Yeah. Suzanna, so slightly different from a corporate perspective. You're looking at travel investments.
Absolutely.
How do you sort of put your arms around, because travel could be anything?
Sure. So for Amadeus, like our focus is definitely to look for new technologies, passionate entrepreneurs who can work with us together to deliver more value proposition faster to our customers. So Amadeus Ventures is a startup investment program that we started 4 years ago. So it's our longest standing external innovation program. We understand that like for a company like Amadeus working with younger companies, entrepreneurs, it may not be our first nature. It doesn't come naturally. And that's why we started this program to make sure that we have a standing platform to be able to talk to entrepreneurs all over the year, all over the world, to be able to offer not only our technologies and our industry knowledge, but also funding and reach to our customers, say to help them grow, and for us to work something interesting together as well.
So from your perspective, from a travel perspective, what's the most exciting thing for you just in terms of sectors in travel that
Sure.
Amadeus cares for?
Yeah. Obviously, we need to focus. There are many things that we can do in the travel industry. There's still a lot of pain points so it's focusing on the traveler's journey that we can improve. For Amadeus on innovation, we have 6 innovation themes where both the internal innovation teams and also external verticals, we all focus together. To summarize them, not to go through them one by one,
right.
It's about helping our customers to improve conversion on online channels. Is it through personalization? Is it about understanding the products better? It's understanding the end travelers better. It's also about extending the offer that we have on our GDS platform. It's about improving operations and efficiencies for travel providers, and also how new technologies is going to affect the travel industry, like the artificial intelligence, the blockchain, the messaging platform, etc.
And so the investments are B2B primarily, not a consumer, because you don't want to become... Okay.
Actually, both. Yeah, we have both B2C companies and B2B companies on our portfolio. Cabify is one of our earlier investments, which is a B2C company. Yeah. Overall, we define things that we can work together with our portfolio companies. So majority, more than half of them are B2B, but sometimes we also invest in B2C companies.
Cristina, lessons from you looking at emerging markets and from a travel perspective, I don't think you've done tons of investment, but e-commerce certainly, which is a lesson. Correct. A lot of the lessons that travel retail is learning is trying to learn from e-commerce players that are sort of ahead of the market. So some of the lessons that you think that you're learning investing in e-commerce players.
Emerging markets has been interesting because in many cases, and this surprises people often, you see these markets leapfrog the developed markets, and penetrations in terms of e-commerce or even online travel get to be much higher, much quicker, often than in developed markets, and we've certainly seen that in e-commerce. That said, I think when you step back, at the end of the day, consumers want the same thing, and in broad strokes, the same themes that we see certainly emerging in our markets, they're universal. So over time, even in places like India, where consumers start out being very price-seeking, once they've been on the internet for 5-6 years. The studies are now showing that they're shifting their preference from price to convenience, right? So convenience is a big trend across the board. Consumers across the world are getting more cash-rich and time-poor. They seek convenience. They'll pay for convenience, and price continues to be important, but it becomes secondary. We've seen a lot of verticals pop up and emerge in a world in which obviously the horizontals, and I think somebody mentioned that earlier, where the horizontal plays the role of the utility play, right? I want to go in, I can get this done quickly, least friction. I really don't want to spend any time on it. I think Booking was mentioning that. Yeah. That doesn't mean that there aren't consumers, because we as consumers are multidimensional creatures, right? There's times that we want to discover. There are times where we want to be entertained while we're shopping. So then the verticals are there to serve that needs, and we see that across the board as e-commerce evolves in all these markets. And then lastly, there's I guess the access economy, which obviously very relevant for travel.
Subscription economy, sort of, is that what you're talking about?
Well, I guess by access I mean not owning something, but
Right.
renting something.
Right, yeah.
Often it's conflated with peer-to-peer, though it's not. As we know, these are actually not even truly peer-to-peer
No.
platforms. They're actually highly centralized and very strong monopolies
Except
in
they
their own
don't
right.
they just don't want to employ them fully.
Correct. So we'll wait for the blockchain to liberate us all. But
Okay, so we have the B word. Okay, let's go into it.
I had to do it.
Amadeus, I'm sure, is looking at it. It's anytime we put blockchain in the headline, by the way,
Yes.
it's the top story of the day. It's just, it used to be content marketing, I remember, in early days of Skift, because content marketing was a hot word. And I'm sure we have others too. We should probably do a story on the top headline terms in travel that got a lot of clickbait.
Sure.
From a travel perspective, what's real?
What's real? At the moment, there are a lot of pilots and experiment that is real. So including ourselves in Amadeus, obviously, that we test. So within internally that we have expertise, we've started to play with the technologies. We have a few pilots over a few use cases for the airlines and other sector of the industry. We also work with third parties, so we partner with startups to see how we can combine forces to learn more about it, because for blockchain, it is not a single company problem. It is a minimum viable ecosystem term. So you need a few parties to dance in that scenario. And so we're also working with third party. Like the only thing that like I cannot do is blockchain, because all the blockchain companies, they do fundraising through ICOs. And so
And a lot of them are publicly saying we're going to disrupt the GDSs.
absolutely. So in that area, so we don't invest in coins or cryptocurrencies at the moment within the vertical that I run. Never say never, but like I had very interesting discussions with blockchain companies themselves, and some of them are also quite skeptical on ICOs. So essentially, they would be sitting on a heap of prepaid revenues, and how is that prepaid revenues going to like sit on their balance sheet for a long time? It's actually quite a philosophical debate over that point. So.
Yeah, can't EU regulate that as well? I don't know if the EU can do that. Scenarios for exit in Europe from your perspective. A lot of the travel, this is very specific to travel. Historically, one of the issues was travel tech or online travel companies that start in Europe may not find exits in Europe. Are you seeing that changing? Like they would go to US companies and US companies would buy them?
I think it's for European startups, like maximizing your valuation, maximizing your chances. Like you need to like explore all options, right? Looking at the current landscape, I think in the US, like with the new tax reform, like there seems to be more cash around to do M&As. So China tech giants, like they're looking at acquisition activities around new technology around the world. So overall, I would say that European companies will continue to explore and should continue to explore cross-border exit options.
I would argue that a company like C-Chip coming in is actually revitalizing buying stuff in Europe, because there were only two that were buying, and now at least there's a third player that's out there to actually buy. Accor, Sebastian is sitting there. I think a lot of travel tech companies are now selling to Accor as well. So it's a whole new market, which is changing, because you would not have thought hotel companies would actually buy tech companies, which is changing quite rapidly. Do you think that from a blockchain perspective or AI perspective, would it probably be more at the tech level, so Googles and Facebooks of the world will win at it, and then the rest of us will adopt it in the travel industry? Is that, or any industry for that matter? As
a technology company, obviously we ask that question ourselves as well. And there are specific knowledge about the travel industry that we believe will remain with the travel industry. So it is about applying the technology in a smart way, and to be able to really go deep down into the traveler experience and focusing on the pain points, and how can you deliver that that end traveler experience. And so in those cases, like Google, Facebook, like there are like more and more parties who are having a lot of data. And so the important thing here is the understanding of the context. So being like having a vertical focus, say, knowing that this is travel in what particular context, will help to use that data smarter than when you are having just a horizontal platform. So we believe that there will be use cases and areas that's being like focused on travel will be in
So across the portfolio that you're looking at, are you thinking more airlines need more disruptors or hotels need more? Is that something you're thinking through?
Right, for Amadeus, because we now have like different customer segments. So we have airlines, airports, hotels, car rental companies, even payment solutions. So within my domain, we actually work transversally. We look at all the customer segments, and actually be able to say, like this particular technology, take an example, we invested in an indoor navigation company in Spain called CTEM. And so looking at that technology that itself is very horizontal. But we can apply that in airports, we can use that in hospitality, and we can actually use it in any like physical space, even railway station. And so yes, so we're looking at being able to serve like all our customer segments through an innovation vertical like Ventures.
Cristina, switching gears a little bit, Tencent investment, what are the lessons that we can learn from the rise of companies like Tencent in China in general, and looking here, sitting in Europe obviously now?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, I'd say certainly from an investor perspective, the biggest lesson is don't sell early, and we held on. And I think other than making the investment in the first place, that's probably the most commendable thing, because certainly over time, as the stock was rising, there is no shortage of advice we got to do so
along the way.
So that took some discipline. But that said, I think China is so unique that every time you try to force a comparison, even to India, I find that it's helping as much as it's lacking. China was and still is a very unique situation in terms of the rise of these platforms, as well as the rise of a middle class that grew faster than anywhere else in the world. If you look at GDP per capita within a 10-year stretch, I don't think that has been precedented or will come around again. That actually gave rise to an e-commerce and internet economy that is second to none, because all of that discretionary spend had to go somewhere. And it had to go somewhere fast in tier 2, 3, 4 cities, where there just wasn't simply time for the malls and the offline stores to roll out, right? So, leapfrog happened with mobile and broadband. It happened with e-commerce and sort of retail. And so those kinds of trends, and certainly Tencent has proven to be a formidable platform and a formidable team in terms of, again, making those kinds of decisions, right? Very early on saying, hey, we'll be a platform, we'll invest in others to come to our platform as opposed to try to do everything.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah.
So quite a few decisions that they've made, obviously, to get to where they are. But that all said, the backdrop is a very specific situation, so it's actually quite hard to apply it. Now, I do think that when I look for inspiration for e-commerce, I always look at China, because things that cause a lot of excitement these days, for example, in the US, like Amazon and Whole Foods and all of that. Now, that's already playing in China for years now. I guess we're now calling it new retail or online to offline, but that whole integration of what are physical assets with data and making those physical assets more efficient, that's happened for a long time, and it's a well-established trend, and one that I think is tremendously promising, right? If you think people And you always hear, and certainly from an investor perspective, focus is always to not own any assets. But I actually think that in a world in which you can empower and enable those assets with data and you can use them efficiently, that's probably the strongest moat you can build around your business, other than being a pure digital business. So I think a lot to learn from China
Yeah,
in
I think
terms
you
of
just
e-commerce.
made a lot of
but,
people in the travel industry happy because they own a lot of physical assets, and that's what they
yeah,
crave for a
listen,
lot.
I think those things are scarce, right? If you kind of think about this big picture, the only issue is that we're not using them efficiently, right? And until now, they've been dumb assets. But if you turn those assets into smart assets, then that's a whole different story. So yeah,
Which
I
is
do think
tons
that's
happening in the hospitality space, for instance, as well.
yeah, and I think to close it off with your favorite topic on blockchain, obviously that stuff is far too early and far too out there. But I do actually think that the promise of decentralization, of moving intelligence and value to the edge of the network, rewarding the people that provide the services, provide the assets, that actually do the work, right, as opposed to pooling. And obviously from an investor perspective, we do like the platforms that if you will, pool the value, that centralized platforms. Right. But I do think that may well be a world to come at some stage. And yeah, I think there will be reward for those that hold and manage assets, as long as they enable them with data. And before all of that, AI today and machine learning is certainly something we do in all of our portfolio companies, right? It's that is happening today. That is today's opportunity.
Right. I know we have to go to questions. What is the most exciting vertical segment you see within travel tech from an investor perspective at the moment?
So I think we've touched
We've
on
we've covered some of it.
Yes.
Voice search. So voice search has a promise
Yes.
of changing completely how we do booking.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How far is it?
A lot of players are testing it. So the importance of it is actually to get a large amount of data. It's a data game. You need the number of conversations to be able to get to an accuracy that it becomes really intelligent. And so I think we're still going through the phase of collecting data. I would say...
oh yeah, Amazon listens to you all the time anyway. Yeah,
absolutely. And so, yeah, so it is a growing technology. We believe that it is going to be big. It is going to be the interface of choice. We're getting there in the process.
Cristina, from voice to e-commerce, I'm guessing China is probably ahead in many ways.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that particular point, and certainly as an
messaging,
interface.
certainly obviously through WeChat and others, they're doing completely. E-commerce is completely WeChat-based environment.
Absolutely. So back to convenience, right? Consumers will find the easiest, most convenient way to do the thing on which they don't want to spend much time, right? That utility purchase, whether that interface is voice or a chat app.
So somebody really wants to ask this question, because I know this was a question asked in the previous thing we weren't able to get to, was the culture trip, but I'm going to go with the Sojourn question. Self-driving cars, so mobility as part of travel. Historically, so the travel industry hasn't necessarily considered mobility as part of travel. Now, obviously, it's at the center of it as well. Self-driving cars.
Yeah, from Amadeus' point of view, like we definitely look at the end-to-end journey. So after looking after your flight, your hotel, so then it is how you're going to get it there and how you're going to get home. And so like the car rental is always part of the equation, and now we are having more and more options in terms of like transits, right? Is it scheduled? Is it on demand? Is it going to be self-driving that you don't need to think about like hiring a driver from the perspective of Ubers and Lyft and Cabify? And so yes, so from Amadeus' perspective, we are also looking at, I would say, mobility overall as part of the end-to-end journey of a traveler. So increasing, getting into the in-city this type of travel, rather than just looking at the long hauls.
I have a 3-year-old son. I've actually told this story before, so if you heard it, I'm sorry. But I have a 3-year-old son. He started playing with the toy cars, And I'm thinking, I was sitting in the weekend thinking, he will never have to learn how to drive a car.
Yes.
So what would the children's toys be when the self-driving cars come? That's the interesting one. So we got to think about
Self-flying drones.
self-driving drones. Oh my God,
There you
no,
go.
not in our house. We live in New York. Other question, current total estimated value of Naspers. I'm sure you really want to answer that question.
I'll take the other one.
What do you make of the latest funding sums going into travel content? So travel content and travel media, I guess what they mean, hasn't really, I mean, I have tons of views on this, but travel media hasn't really cracked in from a sort of digital perspective as a 80 million from culture trade, which is interesting. They want to sort of they want to close the loop on content to transaction, which I know many companies have tried in every sector in the world.
Yeah, from investors' point of view, it is always about monetization. Sadly, we need to talk about money, so even though the concept itself it's very inspirational. And so yes, I think in travel, the question about like travel content and monetization, I think it's still in the testing phase.
Yeah.
And so
Content to commerce in a larger sense?
I think discovery, and back to that vertical point, I do think that there'll be consumers or there'll be shopping instances in which you want to consume and discover that way. And then if you can make it easy for someone to click through and buy as opposed to ask them to go somewhere else and do it, I think that can easily happen. And you know, I do recall the days in which this was tried and didn't work, but I do think we're now in a place in time where a lot of things that weren't possible or kind of broken from an experience perspective are now possible. Mm-hmm. So I do think that that will exist in that sort of discovery shopping behavior as opposed to the utility sort of get in and out quickly.
All right. I think we're out of time. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.